Welcome in and good afternoon. This is Hog YouTube Live, and I'm Kevin McPherson. We're going to jump on here just for a really brief segment. I was wanting to do this last night, but I was trying to gather a little more intel, and I far with a little more intel today. I want to hit it midday, and this could break any moment. This could go down any moment in terms of Arkansas's first portal commitment, but I don't know that there is a private commitment. I don't have that solidified. I don't have a second source on that. And so this could break while we're on here. I've had a bad run yesterday of things breaking while I'm doing a segment. So I came on, gave you a bunch of intel and updates on the portal. And when that happened toward the end of that, while we were wrapping it up, Boogie Fland announced he was going into the draft. So I had to jump back on and do one of those segments. And I did that around 2:15, 2:20ish. About that time over on Discord, it was getting around that Malique Ewin, the 6'11, 240-pound forward center at Florida State, a junior, might be Arkansas bound. And so that was going on. And so once we got through with the Boogie Fland coverage, I started investigating that. I had a text that I'd received and hadn't even looked yet. Someone that, and I put this in quotes, I've added it to a couple of nuggets that I put over at HogvilleNET on my big board, the Hoop Hogs transfer portal big board. I put these notes in here. I'm going to give a little bit more information on it, but I had a text, someone saying he thought that Ewan had already committed to Arkansas. Well, if that's the case, it's a private commit, not a public commit at this point. But that came from one source, and I found out that a lot of this information started over on Discord, started getting through over there. So the one source is telling me that. I have another source, I put this in, that Kansas is making a play for Ewan. And so we're looking for potentially a commitment as soon as today, maybe over the next few days, announcement from him if it's Arkansas. But here are some things. Kansas, we came on when we did our intel segment yesterday. We brought up Kansas and the fact that Flory Badunga, they lowballed him on his NIL for retention. He was getting much stronger offers elsewhere. He went ahead and went to the portal, even though Bill Self tried to salvage it. And it may be, and this is what I said, it may be that he goes back to Kansas. But also Indiana, Auburn, and then we mentioned the big man, Lindeborg. We've been talking about him a lot, and the fact that the intel there was from two sources I had. One was the guy involved with his NBA prospect, directly involved with it, telling me, look, this guy's going to focus on the draft. Then I had another source was talking about his final three, Auburn, Michigan, and Kentucky. And Kentucky, part of it felt like we're out on Lindeborg. And then the idea from this source was, well, Auburn and Bruce Pearl were the front runners after getting Keyshawn Hall. Well, all of that was exactly spot on true. One of the things I brought up and I asked about was on Lindeborg, would Bruce Pearl be okay with waiting around to see if Lindeborg is going to go ahead and stay in college, take a commitment now and play that long game out? Or would somebody else be okay with it? Turns out Michigan's okay with it. Lindeborg to Michigan. That commitment was made. We told you the source information was, and a commitment announcement was expected by the end of the week, maybe the end of the weekend, maybe Friday. Turned out it was today. So Lindeborg to Michigan. And this explains a lot, too, when you start looking at the Kansas part of it. If you look at the names and players that Arkansas is going after, you see the same schools coming after some of the same top-level guys. It's Kansas, Michigan, and Auburn. That's because they're losing a lot. They're losing a lot. And so Kansas lowballed Badunga, however you pronounce his last name, Flory, the freshman last year, 5-star, 6'9" forward, 6'10", 6'9", maybe lowballed him, and we'll see if Kansas can retain that. But it looks like Kansas is also pursuing Ewan. And so we've seen this. Morris Johnson was a guy Arkansas was involved with and had a shot at, and the initial NIL offer I thought was a bit low. We've talked about that. It's nothing new. These are talking points I'm repeating. And then I told you guys yesterday, as part of my intel on retention, that I heard that Trevor Brazil's retention offer was low, and maybe not what what folks thought it might be for someone of his caliber based on the way he was producing at the end of the season. And so if all that's true, you have to think that whatever Arkansas's NIL offer to Ewan is to get into a point where they may be closing on him, that other schools that are more desperate for players, Arkansas needs frontline guys. I won't use the word desperate, but what other word do you want to use? It's a priority and it's a must. They lost 2 guys. John Dew no longer has eligibility, Big Z to the portal, and you're still trying to figure out about Trevor Brazile, but he's a 4-5. He's really sort of your, he's a 5 in certain matchups, but not your preferred 5 to run him out there that way. He's more of a 4 that can stretch the floor a little bit. So Euan would check some boxes there. We've talked about him multiple times. I compared some of him, what I've said on these segments, I've compared him statistically in some ways to what Jonas Adu brought to the table. They're almost identical in rebounds per minute, what Adu brought out of Tennessee, what he was doing at Tennessee as an all-SEC performer. 7.6 rebounds per game for Euan in about 26 minutes. So it was very close to what Adu was giving you. This guy is a more polished offensive player than Adu is. 14.2 points per game. So there's not a lot of comparisons there other than both of them are big, and they're not really floor stretchers in terms of shooting. They're going to get theirs around the basket. So there are similarities to what you lost in Adu and what you might be getting here. I think the difference is Adu is an all-league defensive guy, and I don't see Euan. Yeah, here's a Jalen Graham comparison right here. His footwork's like Jalen Graham. I'm not crazy about that full comparison for reasons. I'll get into that. But Euan would be a guy that's got starter value. He's a starter at Florida State. He's being recruited as a starter. I don't know what Arkansas's NIL offer is, but what I did know was the offer to Morez Johnson, which I thought was not maybe necessarily on the level it should be for a guy like that on a front line and a position of need for a frontline player, but also because of the retention number I heard about Trevor Brazile. Now, I've not shared those numbers with you, but again, these seem low. So I wonder, even if Ewan's good with what Arkansas is offering, is there someone else out there like a Kansas that may be not sure whether they're going to get Flory back? They know Hunter Dickinson's leaving. Even Auburn may still be in the the Flory-Badunga sweepstakes. We mentioned that yesterday. Auburn and Indiana as being teams in there. But would Auburn be making a run at a player like this? Potentially. Auburn, Bruce Pearl, I was told at the end of the day, was not okay. They couldn't entice with enough NIL money to keep Lindenborg from going through his full draft process, which I told you his draft person that is my source said he would be focusing on. It's exactly what the reporting was today from Giavone, other than it's Michigan and not Auburn, but that's because Bruce Pearl stood down. They're not interested in going through that for that. But Michigan's playing with a little house money. They've already got Morez Johnson on the board, the guy that Arkansas missed out on. They had a better offer, and they got him. And so if things don't work out with Lindenborg, but they've still at least got Morez Johnson and may have another direction to go. And look, they're trying to replicate what they had this past season with Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden. Lindenborg's the kind of guy I mentioned. He can pass, he can handle the ball away from the basket, attack, facing, and pick and choose. He may not be exactly like Danny Wolf was, or whatever his first name was, last name Wolf. That was basically a 7-foot distributor, similar to an Amari Williams, probably a little more polished as a facilitator and ball handler. So, yeah, we're getting close to 10 minutes in. So Michigan may be trying to replicate that, and they're willing to take the flyer on whether or not Lindenborg stays in the draft, or maybe they get him. They got their NIL worked out with him. That's great, but it makes sense to me. Arkansas doesn't have time to do that. And Arkansas's got a lot of guys they're trying to retain. They're not in the same spot as some of these teams that are losing a ton of guys. And maybe we'll learn that Arkansas is losing more than we thought when it comes to retention. But right now, Ewan makes sense from a guy that brings you some offense. I saw the comparison to Jalen Graham. I'm not crazy about that comparison necessarily. He's bigger. Both of them are going to give you their scoring output from 15 feet, moves and spin moves and drop steps that you can maybe compare. But this guy's a much better rebounder. He averages 3.1 offensive rebounds per game. Jalen Graham was really hit and miss in terms of effort on the glass, in terms of consistent, not just consistent rebounding, defensively getting back in transition. Now, Ewan doesn't necessarily project as a plus defender. He's not a rim protector, but he's a bigger body. So he's more of a presence physically than Graham was. Yeah, there may be some craft in terms of how they operate 15 feet in, but there is a difference too. You hear about big men that can beat you from the 3-point line. The first thing that comes to mind is, okay, that's a guy that can shoot threes. Well, that's not what Ewan is, but what he is a guy that can begin his handle to work his way toward the basket or find other players as he dribbles that can start out behind the 3-point line. That wasn't Jalen Graham. Jalen Graham was a guy that elbow extended. He was effective driving from those areas, but you really didn't want him out on the court handling the ball. Ewan can handle the ball way out there, and he's a better passer. I remember Graham sometimes would pass off the help after he beat a guy on a spin move, but a lot of times he was just locked in on that rim and took some tough shots too. He was effective, but Ewan will make the right play. He 14.2 points per game, 7.6 rebounds, so a better rebounder than Graham, bigger, but he's actually better handling the ball in multiple places once you get cross half court. He can even bring it up some. That really wasn't Graham. I don't like the comparison other than maybe 15 feet and in some of the craft and getting into his shot. And certainly he's not stretching the floor in terms of a shooter out there. But he does stretch the floor because you have to really account for him. A guy like Grant Nelson, when he was on the mid-major level, again, a guy that could shoot threes, so you don't make that comparison, but really good at 6'11", with some guard sensibility about him and handles to break down other bigs and kind of maneuver out from the 3-point line, driving in and getting closer to the basket. That's what this guy can do. So I like Malique Ewin. I think this is a good fit for Arkansas, but I'm not here to say that he's a silent commit. Again, I've got one source that thinks maybe he is, and he heard that and thought that, was and here's another thing I'll tell you. Here's another little nugget I'll give you. I have been calling him. I've been talking to a lot of prospects, but from the first time I've called him, I've only called him 3 times. I haven't been stalky about it since yesterday through midpoint today, and I was hoping to get him on the phone, but his phone has immediately gone to voicemail from the first time I called him. And I've called him, like I said, 3 times. I don't have experience stalking women or girls growing up, dating. They always chase me. But I knew the patterns. I knew the patterns. And so I knew the difference between the stalky and the ones that were very calculated about it, trying to play it cool. So this is one of those things where I'm trying to get him on the phone. He did not pick up, and it went straight to voicemail each time. So I've made the effort. I've talked to a lot of the prospects Arkansas is on, and I may break through, but I wanted to bring a little bit more. Yeah, I've had my share of them. Long history of them. Well, I'm semi-retired now, guys. I'm smart enough to pick and choose and know how to play that game. But back in the day, man, I wasn't always smart about it. Some of that was on me, letting the mixed signals carry things through a little bit longer than I wanted. No one cares about your love. I know. I was just kind of making jokes, kind of not, but the point is that I'm trying to reach Malik Ewin, and we'll see. Again, this would be a good fit for Arkansas, but you've still got work to do on the front line. We've said over and over, and I've repeated it. Arkansas needs 2 front line guys. They need 2 bigs, and both of them don't have to be bruiser banger types, paint enforcers. In fact, you want a little diversity on your front line. But because if you're only retention guy, really, when you look at as a 4-5 combo, Trevor Brazile, even though he's become more aggressive and playing better with physicality, that's not his role either. So you need at least one. I don't think Malik Ewin checks that box. He's probably a little more physical than the comparison that someone floated up. But I think at the end of the day, you go get a guy that can be maybe both athletic, rim protector, and a physical guy. You may not, with what you get out of that is one or the other. You may get a guy like, let's say it's Nick Pringle, who's, a physical guy, around the paint kind of guy, a good rebounder, but he's not really a shot blocker. Or you may get someone that's more of an athletic shot blocker and maybe not quite as physical as a guy like Kamani Johnson or, somebody else. Either way, I mean, there, Damian Collins, who played for Cal at Kentucky, in the portal now. He's jumped in. That was yesterday. He's a guy with familiarity. We've talked about Somtu Cyril and Jaden Quaintance, and I came back on and talked about Quaintance as a guy that Arkansas is going to do more than just kick the tires on. He does have the knee injury that he's dealing with after just having surgery. But those are guys that didn't play for Cal, but they signed with Cal. So keep an eye on some of these names. There's other names out there. I've talked multiple times, brought his name up multiple times. Quincy Ballard, another guy that would fit that shot blocker type, a big rebounder, rim protector out of Wichita State. I watched him play twice against Memphis this year. Some really good heated battles between those teams, and he was in the mix there and had a big double-double. Had several on the season, but he had one against Memphis in one of those games I saw. But there's obviously other frontline guys out there that you can look at, and some that have been connected with Arkansas. Some of them are off the board. So I appreciate everybody jumping in. I'm going to keep this to a minimum. The only other thing I'll say about Kansas is they've got a lot to replace in the backcourt too. They're bringing in Darren Peterson. We know they've been heavy after Lamar Wilkerson. They may be trying to get Ewan convinced to it may be a done deal for Arkansas. We're just waiting for it to go public. It's what it sounds like it's heading to. But I don't have that fully firmed up, and I also know Kansas is there's been some scramble on getting in touch with him. I'll put it that way, and trying to see if they can get something going there. Kentucky's another team that had two frontline visitors last week. Taylor Bowen was one of those. He comes off the board to Alabama. Babako, or the former five-star that played at Indiana, was another guy they had on campus and was hoping to get committed. And I don't know where exactly that is right now, but I know he's not off the board to Kentucky. And these are two guys that came to campus, so, it's not like Kentucky has egg on its face right now. They just got a transfer guard to help answer some of their portal questions. I think it was their first commitment. So it's not like Arkansas has a ton of needs, but they have a huge need on the front line. And Ewan may be that answer coming up. Just keep an eye on things. I've given you the best intel I can. I'd like to get the guy on the phone. We'll see if that ever happens. His phone's been going straight to voicemail immediately. And then let's talk about Lamar Wilkerson and some of these other guys on the perimeter. I added those updates to my HogvilleNET article as well. But Kansas adding a guard out of Loyola Chicago, a shooting guard. They lost Zeke Mayo. They had Rylan Griffin going to the portal. We know that they're having a lot of guys. So it's not like they can only have Peterson and this shooting guard that they just got out of the portal for Loyola Chicago. His name escapes me for the moment. But they've been hard recruiting Lamar Wilkerson. I don't know that precludes him moving forward if they're waving the white flag on him. But when you see something like that, you think, okay, they answered a need in the backcourt on a 2/wing. Maybe that means they're out on Lamar Wilkerson. Other teams are in on him. That's just the thing, the way it is. Just like with a guy like Jaden Quaintance. Somtu Cyril's not in the portal, but you think maybe there's a chance he goes. There's been a lot of talk of that. Quaintance is, but it's not just Arkansas on the Calipari tie. I mean, Missouri, Dennis Gates. There's other teams. I've heard several from the Big Ten and other major conferences that are after him. I don't have as much info on some of that, but just Missouri, that'll be one in the SEC that goes after him. And I'm not sure if there's any, would be any interest at all with a team he was signed with, which was Kentucky. But, he did sign. That was more about Calipari at the time. But Wilkerson's a guy that I think it's still number one in terms of backcourt on my big board. I mentioned yesterday that Jerron Pierre Jr. had heard from Arkansas, his agent did, and there may be a Zoom in the future with him, but that was the Conference USA Player of the Year, another 6'5" guard, another prolific volume three-point shooter, not quite as good percentage-wise as Wilkerson, but really good, over 38%. So you'd take that on a guy taking nearly 8 per game, 21-point scorer. Kentucky and Ole Miss, he's actually talked directly with them himself personally. He told me North Carolina State's in the mix. Keep an eye on that. We've been talking about Tyrone Wiley IV out of San Francisco. He's either met or Zoomed with Arkansas's coaching staff. That's based on someone else's reporting. Abdi Bashir Jr., who was setting up a 6'7" transfer out of Monmouth, 20 points per game. Another high-volume three-point shooter at over 38%. I spoke with him, and he told me he hasn't got the Zoom set up yet with Arkansas, and that may still be something that happens. So those are some of the names front line and backcourt. But I wanted to give you the updates on Ewan. I'm going to repeat them real quick, 20 minutes in before we get off. I've got one source that thought maybe he's already committed to Arkansas on the private level. A lot of that stuff started stirring late yesterday afternoon on Discord. And then I've also got a source telling me that Kansas is really trying to make a push there. It could be that Arkansas is getting it done and it's going to be a done deal. But it also could be a situation where if it's highest bidder and another team comes hard, that could delay a decision or an announcement. Doesn't mean Arkansas wouldn't up the ante or figure that out, but it didn't feel like Morez Johnson. So I'm not trying to panic anybody. This may end up being something that we're just waiting on any moment getting a commitment announcement for Arkansas. And it, you know, based on a couple of things, it looks like it could be headed that way. I'm not at a place where I'm hearing he's certainly, I haven't been able to confirm a private commitment, and I don't have, like I did with Morez Johnson and with Trevor in Brazil, a figure just yet on what that NIL is. I got to think it's at least what they offered Morez Johnson, maybe a little bit more. But again, when other teams that are as desperate as you or more desperate than you, not only positionally, but just needing bodies, period, that's when the NIL can escalate, and Calipari does a good job of staying within his valuation ranges. And there are other bigs out there. I'm not trying to give you the idea that Arkansas is not going to get Ewan. I'm saying it may not quite be done yet based on some stuff I'm getting, and I've shared that with you now, and I've repeated it. So we're going to finish on that note. Sorry I brought up my dating history and my past love life scenarios. Apologies there. I just did that mainly playfully to explain that sometimes when you're reaching out to recruits, a lot of times some of these guys don't even answer because their agent's handling it. And then you go that way. And then an agent calls me back and they're very sketchy on what they tell you. A lot of times I have success with my contacts getting through to players. A lot of them know me because I covered them in high school, different places. So there's already relationship and exchange there from when they were maybe recruited briefly or by previous Arkansas staff, whatever the scenario is. I have a pretty good track record of getting in touch with some of these guys. I just found it interesting that he's maybe got his phone off still. I haven't tried it in a few hours, but it's been turned off, going straight, like I said, straight to the voicemail, I think on 3 attempts that I've made so far. So I shared that with you. I normally don't talk about stuff like that. Just a little something extra today. Thank you for joining me on this briefer HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson. Please hit subscribe, like, and share. Until next time, and it may break soon or something else breaks, I'm jumping right back on. I'm being more repetitious about doing these multiple times in a day when something significant happens. So we may see you soon, or it may be sometime tomorrow. Thanks for being here. See you then.